Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sport Psych Show. I'm really excited. I have Rob Robson on the line today. Rob is a former supervisor of mine, a mentor of mine. He's agreed to come on, so it's fantastic to have him here. Rob, welcome to the Sport Psych Show.
Good morning.
Now, I usually introduce the guests on the Sport Psych Show, but I've decided to change it today. So if you'd care to introduce yourself to the Sport Psych audience, that would be fantastic. Rob, Who are you and what do you do?
Okay, well, so my name's Rob Robson. I'm a bit of a variety of roles and influences here and reasons for being on this show. As you mentioned, I was once your supervisor or mentor, and therefore a sports psychologist. I'm a chartered sports psychologist with the British Psychological Society. But in recent years, at least, most of my work has been in business organisations, and I'm now an organisational consultant. I do some sports psychology. But I'm also a competitive swimmer in master swimming, so I compete against people my own age group, which, by the way, is 45 to 49. And in that, I've currently got 4 British records. So there's a bit of an interesting angle here about being both a sports psychologist and a competitor, and I think there's some special things about masters sport in particular that we could talk about.
And when you say masters sport, being the term used for older competitors.
Yes, so different sports have different terminology. So in athletics, you talk about veterans, which is usually, I think, 40 plus. In swimming, master swimming starts properly at 25 plus. And it's both about age, really, and lifestyle. Particularly in recent years where, 25 used to be old for a swimmer.
Yeah.
At elite level, it was quite unusual for people to continue much beyond that, and therefore master swimming started then. Now, you have quite a number of professional athletes continuing, into their 30s, and therefore there is this crossover. But really what we do in Masters, the community is very much about giving people the opportunity to compete. And at that age group of sort of 25 to, say, 35, it's more about the fact that it's not the most important thing in your life. You're not, people are that swim and compete are not full-time swimmers. And so you can identify, if you like, as a master swimmer, even though you might be younger than someone who's in an Olympic final.
So you mentioned having British records there. You mentioned you having a great deal of success as a masters swimmer. How do you? And you also said that it's at a time when it's not the most important thing. So how do you balance out family life and work life and masters swimming life? How do you go about doing that?
I think the whole thing about balance is probably the if you like, the sort of core challenge of being a successful masters athlete. I think most people get into it. Some people continue through, from swimming in their 20s and sort of continue. But I think a lot of people come back to the sport, and usually it's for reasons of sort of health and fitness. And the swimmers, I think, seem to struggle just to do normal exercise, and then the motivations change. So I go from, and I've seen it so many times. I did it myself, from wanting to do a couple of sessions a week and just lose a bit of weight, get a little bit fitter. Then you start eyeing competition and start thinking, I could do some good times here, and it's really what I've noticed is that the people that do well. And I include myself here, do find that balance and actually approach competition in a way that's sustainable. And by that I do mean that not only do you balance out things like work and family and other things, but you don't necessarily think, but you don't over egg the pudding. You don't try and do too much. Even when I do have more time, I don't do more training. I try and balance it. I try and keep a level that I can continue, over a period of time. So I swim generally 3 times a week, sometimes 4 when I'm really pushing it for about an hour, and then I go to the gym generally 3 times a week. And when I'm on it, as it were, I'm more consistent about that. I don't do more. I'm just more consistent in the way that the way that I manage that. So I think, but that balance is really important, and that sort of training and working sustainably is sort of important.
If we were to drill down on 3 times a week, sometimes 4 times a week, practice training, what does that look like? Are you kind of saying to me that because I practice and train less, because I've got to have that balance in life, that hour that I do is better, it's better quality? Have you got to almost force yourself to have a better quality training session?
Yeah, the focus is very much on quality and in higher intensity. So I don't sort of waste time doing aerobic work, as it were. I am actually naturally good at a 200 breaststroke. Would be my most natural event, but I actually do sacrifice a little bit of performance in the 200 in order to sort of manage things. I do work with much more intensity. We do a lot more work at race pace than I used to do. I used to do 10 to 12 sessions a week in the pool. A lot more slow, steady work, and there's a trend in with the younger competitors as well towards more sort of high intensity race pace work as well. But it's really important that we don't waste any of our time, really.
So there's an element when you think about the younger competitors. Because I do want to also bring this back from your experiences as a master swimmer. Taking the kind of the benefits and the advantages of being a master swimmer and bringing that back down to the whether it's the elite levels or the developing elite levels of sports people, because you're forced to have greater quality, because you're really forced to have that physical and mental intensity in that 3 times 1 hour or 4 times 1 hour that you do, your quality goes up. When you reflect back, the 12 sessions you did a week, really perhaps you should have been doing the same kind of intensity then as you do now.
I think to a certain degree, yes. I think when if I was sort of 18 again and I was doing my sort of 10 sessions a week, clearly I would put more emphasis on some of the other kinds of work. I would do some more endurance type work, but I think the influence of the higher intensity and the race pace work would definitely be much higher than it was back then.
And is that from a representational perspective, as in you have to have that kind of intensity in a race, so why not train like that? Yeah,
there's some different sort of philosophies out there, and one of the ones that has gained sort of a lot of exposure in recent years is this concept of ultra short race pace training.
Okay.
And that is swimming at race pace for short distances, but with short rest. Yep. And it's different to say lactate tolerance, in that you don't fatigue quite to the same degree, and the emphasis on quality. So they say it might be, for example, 30 times 25 meters on a 1-to-1. Swim to rest. So if I'm doing sort of 17 seconds for my breaststroke, 25 meters breaststroke at 100 race pace, I'll go off at 35. And so it's a different kind of physiological effect, but but it's also, but the emphasis on quality, and so they'll say if you do start to fatigue and you do start to lose form, stop, take a rest, and then restart. Not restart completely, but join back in again. And say the philosophy there is never lose the quality. Whereas something like lactate tolerance is swim until you throw up, kind of thing. and it does it sort of your stroke will deteriorate and your times will deteriorate, and this is a different philosophy. And it's interesting. I mean, we don't use it as a, there are people who do this sort of stuff as a kind of as also training, as a kind of a total approach. We dip in and out of it, and we use some of the principles in what we do. But it's interesting, and the thing is about that is it's kind of a different sort of neurological effect. You don't get that same with not having the same sort of level of deterioration. You don't also get the same sort of neurological fatigue, I think.
I think it's interesting because listening to you there, so there's contrasting philosophies in how to train as a swimmer, and I dare say that bears resemblance with sports disciplines like athletics. And if I was to bring this back to say football and soccer and rugby in England, and my experiences in working in both those sports, there seems to be this sort of conflicting challenge. You've got coaches who will talk about the importance of training like you play and having that kind of representational intensity. If we want to be intense on Saturday, if we want to have that physical and mental intensity on Saturday, then we must have that in training. But that almost, for me, goes against this literature, this notion of deliberate practice. Anders Ericsson's deliberate practice, I tend to call it intentional practice, that it's important to when you practice and when you train, to go out there with some goals in mind that will require you to self-reflect in the moment, to self-criticize, to check in with yourself. Right, am I keeping my body shape here? Am I getting my passes away quick enough? What do I need to do better? And I recently had an interesting conversation with a rugby player who we were talking about effective training, and he said to me, Dan, everybody talks about training like you play and how that bearing resemblance to the kind of intensity you need to have in training. But he said, the reality is, I want to go. Training can't be the same as competition, because I've got to have that critical voice. I've got to check in and analyse my game during practice or training, because when else will I? And I don't know if there's a question in that, but it's kind of reflecting back to you. Yeah.
No, I think I get that. And there's a couple of responses to that. I think as a masters athlete, I spend less time on skill development than I would, if I was younger. And that's just about making choices, obviously, about how I spend my time and accepting. And this is one of the big things about being a masters athlete: accepting that might have an impact on what I can achieve, but putting it into a kind of a realistic frame. But I think there is you do need that base of skill development, and then during that base of skill development, you do need to stop, really think, and really kind of perfect the technique. But something like when we work to that sort of intensity about race, and at race practice, it's also got to be at race quality. Okay, and I think that for me the thing that's important is to be able to transition from perfecting a skill and stopping and checking to checking in the moment and being aware of what is going on with your technique, your body. For me, my tempo, my stroke length, etc. Now, that's easier in a sort of closed skill sport like swimming. And I can scan my body, and I can, a little like an airline pilot, check, and go through things. A little bit harder in a dynamic sport like football or rugby, but the principle's still there.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're talking now, I'm reflecting back on say a sport like golf, where the first podcast I did, I had a good conversation with Dr. Ed Corland, skills coach, and he's a big believer that that's one of the things we've got wrong in golf, is that we're too keen to put words in his mouth here, but we're kind of too keen to separate the skill act with the competitive play, and actually we need to be quicker to bring both together. So you might spend a brief period, you might hit a dozen golf balls, feeling the new swing or the swing move that you're trying to not so much ingrain but experience and feel, and then test it with a game much quicker, rather than spend 4 hours beating golf balls, ingraining this technique, and only then start to play, have a skills test or a game on the practice ground, and then take it onto the course. So listening to you there, it's kind of, as a swimmer, you can scan and check in and retain the kind of intensity that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Maybe in rugby and football, it's the player taking ownership of, okay, so for 10 minutes in training today, I'm going to scan and check in and be reflective and strive to keep the right intensity, get that intensity sweet spot. And then I'm not going to worry so much about my first touch or the skill I'm trying to develop, and just focus on that intensity sweet spot.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things. I think the first observation is that, over the years talking to elite athletes and watching sport, is that major competitions are not won with perfect technique. Generally, they're won by the people who hold it together. Hold together the basics well.
Yeah.
Under pressure, and so it's not necessarily about perfection of technique. It's about getting that level of technique that you have, so that it holds up under pressure, and therefore, when you transfer that into this idea of practicing at a level of intensity and a reality, the first time, if you're even in a closed skill type sport, but certainly in a dynamic sport, the first time that you sort of go into a game situation in training and try and check in and are checking your technique, it's going to fall over, right? But the more you do that, it's a skill in itself. And so I bet I've never spoken to the greatest football players in the world, or the greatest rugby players in the world, but I bet that they do check it. I bet they are. They're not. It's about focus. They're not focusing their attention for long periods of time, but they're just developing that ability to very quickly check. Just notice what they're doing. They've got that body awareness, if you like, of what's going on.
I think it's really, yes, there's so much rich stuff you've said there, and so much relevant to my life at the moment, the conversations I'm having and the articles I'm writing. I mean, again, I spoke to a rugby player recently. That's what he said he does. I sat down with him and he said, you know what, Dan, it's not so much that I think my way through a game. I kind of bodily scan my way through a game.
Yeah.
I check in with how I feel, and it was really interesting. There was a good video released recently of Lionel Messi and sort of a voiceover of Messi that's been subtitled in English and his highlights, and he's talking about what he does on the pitch, and he says, I don't think before a game, I know very instinctively, but equally he says, I feel the game. There was a couple of sentences where he talks about I feel what the game is like, and I feel. So it's not so much he's feeling he's scanning his body, but he's actually feeling the game. And I think what I would say is that he's kind of feeling, what are the opposition doing here? What's there? He's not thinking it. He's kind of sensing, what are the opposition doing here to stop me, and what are my best strategies? And the conversation I had with, a couple of strikers from the Premier League, I've asked them, who is the best defender you've ever played against? And most notably, the answer tends to be Rio Ferdinand. Well, why is that? Well, because he's kind of one step ahead of you. You're thinking about running into a certain position, and then he's covered that position. So and this maybe comes back to a conversation about the notion of the zone. Is that I've always said it's not a high performance mindset isn't no thinking. But equally, it's not 5,000 bits of thought. It's kind of a bit of thinking, a bit of strategizing, checking in with feelings, checking in with sensations.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's not the whole thing about unconscious. It's not a lack of awareness at all. It's not a lack of thought at all. It's a lack of effort, if you like, in thinking. It's a speed of thought. It's about it coming naturally, and that's just based on years of. Okay, some people may have a particular talent for it, but that's about years of experience, and essentially you're accessing that database very, very efficiently. But it isn't like a black hole. Your mind, when they talk about performing unconsciously, it's not like a black hole. It's just a very well trained. It becomes instinctive, but it's not characterized by sort of nothingness.
When you think of the greatest swimmers of all time, again, you're a master swimmer, and I don't know how much you sort of watch and keep up with the swimming industry. Obviously, Adam Peaty's doing great at the moment, and obviously Michael Phelps is Michael Phelps. I mean, how much of swimming is psychological, Rob? Because obviously, I look at physiques and physiology, and how much is psychological?
I think it's interesting. It's a huge amount. I mean, in reality, psychology is the icing on the cake. Yep. In that you've got to have the technique, you've got to have the speed, the endurance, you've got to have the physiology to swim the perfect race to actually do it. But then psychology is the differentiator, I think, fundamentally. And swimming is about efficiency. It's about your efficiency through the water, and the water is not your friend. Anybody who is not a swimmer will tell you how tiring it is when you're inefficient in the water. And slight changes in psychology, particularly things like anxiety, and tension, because anxiety is an emotion. It's not it doesn't inherently cause tension, but it's associated with tension in the body, and that any tension at all impacts upon your efficiency, and when the margins are so tight, and you see even at the elite level, swimmers start that get it a little bit wrong start to look like they're going backwards almost in the water to other people. And psychology, that is, I think, really psychology. Those they're not unfit. They're highly trained athletes. They got something a little bit wrong, and even the planning, even the idea that perhaps they've not stuck to the race plan. That's still psychology.
You see, I'm going to come back to your first comment back there and push back slightly, or at least have a conversation about it, is that you've mentioned psychology being the icing on the cake, and I think that historically is where we do ourselves a disservice, and perhaps we need to be better at pushing this notion of psychosocial first. I just wonder if it's not the icing on the cake. I wonder if psychosocial, and I'm going to use the term psychosocial, is the ingredients of the cake. Because and hey, I'm happy for you to go, Dan, you're biased, you're a sports psychologist, so that's why you're saying this. Because I wrestle with this myself, because I always say I don't deny the clearly technical, the technique, the tactical side, the physical side of vital, but you've got to learn those, and learning is one would say it's a neurological and a physical, as in a nervous system phenomenon. You know, you've got to be a great learner. So I would say that comes under the psychosocial remit. It's important to establish a good environment around yourself, psychosocial, and then you've got to be able to compete, psychosocial, the psych piece. So what I try to do when I work with a coach, or especially when I work with a client, is, you know, get them to put mindset first without completely destroying the notion of the importance of skill, tech, tact, physical.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with what you say. I think the way I put that is that on the day of competition, you have to be in the right shape. You know, you have to have the skills. You have to have, you know, in a sport where it is physically demanding, you have to be in condition. You know, and that's where psychology, if you like, is, and bear with me for a moment, is icing on is it icing on the cake. But if you don't have the psychology right, and I, you know, in that environment, that psychosocial thing, I get completely. If you don't have all that right, you're not going to get onto that platform in the first place in order to compete at that level. So it is both on the day, you know, the thing that differentiates two almost identical, you know, physical specimens, but in the process of getting there, it's absolutely fundamental from you know, the way that your coach behaves when you're young, through to which impacts on the mindsets that you develop as an athlete, which impacts upon the way that you train, and it's completely cyclical in that sense. That and you know, starting young, you either build, you know, constantly building sort of positives, or you can be sort of, you know, you're building this sort of shaky platform that, you know, 90% plus of athletes who don't become, you know, elite or professional, you know, have that shakier platform, and a few just through, you know, sheer talent and will, you know, will get there. But for the most part, that platform has to be strong, and that's where, you know, mindset is absolutely critical, and environment's critical.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a question for you, Rob. You know, you're a record holder. You've won big competitions at masters level. How much you have what could be described probably as an encyclopedic knowledge of sports psychology interventions and theories. So how much have you used your knowledge? Are you good at knowing and doing? You know, do you do the do of what you know?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And in many ways, I think so that, you know, it started. So if I go back to sort of 10, 11 years ago when I actually started competing in master swimming, having not done anything consistently for over 15 years, you know, my first point was, right, I need to lose some weight. I need to get myself sorted out, because I'd at that point fairly recently been diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, so it's a chronic illness to deal with. But then I started competing, and I said to myself at that point, you know what, if you don't enjoy it, don't do it. And I actually at that point made a conscious choice, not just to not do it if I didn't enjoy it, but to cultivate a mindset in which I put enjoyment first. And, you know, and it sounds odd to say to cultivate that, but, you know, I remember I used to be quite deliberate about this, and now it's just something that comes completely natural. So I do focus on the process almost entirely. I set goals, but pretty loosely. Mm-hmm. I don't create expectations for myself, because I know that there are many, many challenges. So, for example, last couple of years I've gone up to, you know, the main event for me of the year, which is usually the English Nationals, and I've had a horrendous week at work. You know, I'm stressed, I feel mentally tired, and I think I could really do without this. But then I get there and I switch on, and it's all about enjoying it, having a high level of energy. And so I'd be the one sort of at the end of, you know, while people are sort of standing there trying to look like they're trying to get their game face on and calm down and stuff, jumping about and putting as much energy into things as I can, because and getting excited, getting up for it, rather than trying to manage anxiety, because anxiety comes from setting expectations for yourself and thinking about consequences and all that sort of stuff. And I just took all that stuff kind of off the table, really. And I build. I focus heavily on the process, both at competition and in training. Try and get things right, but I also accept when I go to the competition. I accept where I am, because I am working within constraints of being a masters athlete and not an elite athlete, and I accept where I am, and so I always recalibrate. Whatever goals I do set, I always recalibrate them, and accept that's okay. And my goals are almost really all about execution. Now, I have an idea about the time that I think that might get me, but I actually genuinely don't really care that much about the finals in terms of medals and things. Some of my most satisfying performances, at national level, have not resulted in a medal, but it's been perhaps in events where I was less likely to, but it's all about it. Even though at the same competition I might have won gold medals, I look at that performance that got me fourth and say that was my best performance, and I take the satisfaction from that. So I apply a lot, and it's more about that motivational level. But I put a lot into my preparation on the day. I don't take the race that seriously. I take the preparation more seriously. See what I mean?
What's fascinating about what you've said there is that I wrote down 7 kind of principles that you work by, and they're just everything I do with players, and I think Sport Psychs do it. So number 1 is cultivate enjoyment. Hey, we can co-author a book here, Rob. So number 1 is cultivate enjoyment. Number 2 is focus on the process, have execution goals, and be carefree about outcome. Number 3 is no expectations, which is linked to the previous one. Number 4 is switch on. Number 5 is high energy. Number 6 is game face. Number 7 is acceptance of who I am. Calibrate goals around my circumstance.
The only time I find it difficult, actually, in that sense, is a funny one. So I mentioned earlier in the conversation that 200 is more of my natural event, but that's also the way that I train. It's also at the point at which I'm starting to sort of overreach the extent of my training a bit, and the only thing I get nervous about is the pain of a 200. I don't get nervous about any other aspect of racing, but the pain of a 200, it changes my mindset a bit, and I'm still learning to just accept that pain and to accept that it's fleeting, and to go out and sort of take it in a way. And I'm getting there. I do it sometimes better than others, but I never worry about the results. But I do sometimes have a nagging feeling about the pain that's coming my way.
How are you trying to manage that? I could imagine, actually. How are you trying to manage that? Are you doing something, are you trying to sort of change the story around that on a day-to-day basis, that pain? Or are you trying to apply specific strategies in the race itself when you feel the pain?
I think the main thing, actually... Yeah, there's a couple of things. I think the biggest thing is in the past, I haven't swum many 200s over the course of a year. I don't compete that often, and then not all Masters competitions even have 200s. They're often a one-day competition with mostly sprints. So I'm trying to do the distance more often at the right intensity. So that's a simple thing to do. But also going from thinking, oh, this is going to hurt, to, all right, it's going to hurt, but it's over quickly. Okay. I used to over monitor. We talked about monitoring in the race, but I used to sometimes do that a little bit too much in the 200 because you've got a little bit more time to think, I suppose. And I'd be saying, "Oh God, I'm breathing. I'm only halfway through. I'm breathing a bit heavily and stuff." So just sort of now realizing, okay, that's fine. That's, and just putting that away. That's I will be. It's still I'm still, I have still just done 100 breaststrokes at a reasonably fast pace. Yeah, I will be breathing a bit. And yes, it's more about that acceptance. Yeah, it's going to hurt. Suck it up.
Do you think do you think it's possible to turn acceptance into enjoyment of that, or do you think do you think that's individual specific? Do you think that's living in la la land? I mean, it's interesting listening to the one of the greatest triathletes of all time, Alistair Brownlee, or the Brownlee brothers, and they say, yeah, we love the pain. We love the pain.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a biological predisposition to that? Do you think that can be learned?
I think it can be. And I think it's then it's about what I think it becomes. Then what does the pain mean? And I think that so you can learn to love pain. I think it can become your friend because it's helping you. I'm going to experience this pain, and I'm going to go through more pain than all those other guys, because then I know that I can take that pain, and no matter what happens in the race, I can take the pain. And so it becomes so you can think of it in terms of it. So I'm looking, and we talk, as you know, I'm an advocate of, or I use reversal theory in my work, and I'm sort of looking around the different states here, and it's about the meaning of that pain. So you might not love it, but you can think, well, it's enabling something, or it's taking me closer to my goal, or it's, or actually the fact that I'm the guy that takes this amount of pain, it makes me a bit different, and I like that. So lots of different ways in which I think you can embrace the pain without actually necessarily enjoying it as such. I'm sure it isn't. I'm sure it is possible. And actually, in reality, I'm not sure I love the pain, but I enjoy the physicality of certain aspects of training, like weight training and stuff like that. So I just sort of like the burn. So I think it is possible. Yeah, and it's not necessarily pure enjoyment, but it's about finding meaning in it and having a positive kind of association with it.
You mentioned the term there, reversal theory, and I do want to come on to this. I part that for one question, so I want to come back to that. You mentioned the importance of high energy. You used the term game face, which you probably know, something that I talk about all the time. But high energy. So how do you get high energy? How do you do that?
I use my physical prep as my mental prep, if you like. Okay. So with swimming, the standard for competition is that there's a formal warm up at the very beginning of a session, and then your race might be much later in the session. Now you can get into a good standard of competition. You can get into a different pool to warm up and stuff as well. But I got into the habit of having a physical land warm up, and I use that both as a physical prep in itself, and so to get my actual physiological levels up. But I also use that to sort of stay kind of in the moment. So to sort of gives me something to do, something to focus on, and I find, and I've always generally recommend this, that that if you can actually develop that routine and then focus in on what you're doing and do that scanning and pay attention to what you're doing, it takes you into that playful state of being in the moment, where when you turn your physiology on, then you start to feel good. You start to enjoy that. You start to get that sense of excitement rather than anxiety.
Absolutely. Reversal theory, Rob. What is that? So I'm always aware that we've got coaches and participants.
How long have you got?
in a nutshell, so Rob, you are a psychologist. So all psychologists tend to work from use a framework or work from a theoretical stance. So, in as simple terms as you can, what is reversal theory?
So reversal theory is a general theory of human experience, which means that it tries to explain all aspects of human experience, and it's centered around what we call motivational styles or meta motivations, which are sort of the higher order motivations, broad motivations, if you like. And those motivations are like lenses through which we see the world and we experience things, and they influence our emotional experience. And so what reversal theory is and does is it provides a structure for looking at different issues, different challenges, and that meaning that we give to things, and its impact that it has on emotions and behaviours. And it provides a structure for me as a psychologist and a consultant to start looking at issues. It doesn't explain everything, but it's that structure that kind of helps me to decide which sort of direction to go down. And then other theories, things and interventions and things come out of that. So it doesn't stop me from thinking about psychology in other ways. It just sort of kind of helps me map things out in terms of the way in which I might approach a situation.
So would I be right in saying that our motivation in the moment heavily influences or drives our emotions, which heavily influences or drives our behaviour?
Yes.
Is that what it's sort of saying? And
yes.
You use the term reversal, so it's reversal theory. So where does the reversal come in?
So these 8 motivations or motivational styles there are 8 of them, and the structure of them is that they're organized into 4 pairs, right. And the research has shown that those 4 pairs are oppositional, so they're binary at any point in time. So to use 2 as an example, if I'm at the serious state, which is being goal orientated and future focused, versus being playful, which is being in the moment. You can't be both of those at exactly the same time. Okay. And the reversal is that we ebb and flow between them over time. So in a short period, even as short as like a swimming race, or in a 90-minute game of football, you might flip flop between those states many times.
Yep.
But at that precise moment, if you actually just stop time, you would be one or the other. And the reversal is that movement between them. Yeah.
And so how does that play out in terms of helping people perform? So if you take that, and I don't know if this is a very simplistic way, because you said there's 8 styles, so 4 opposites, serious versus playful. Yeah. So is it about helping people sort of become more skillful at identifying what state they're in and identifying the most appropriate state to be in? It can be both. So on one hand, you can try and be more effective within a particular state. So for example, if you're in the World Cup final, or and you're about to take a penalty, it's quite difficult to be in the moment. The fact is, you will be conscious of what this means. This penalty means, and so in that situation, it might be about being more effective in that state, which might be about downplaying the significance of the event. It might be about managing your physiological arousal levels. It might be about bringing in other coping strategies, for example. But at other times, you might say, well, actually, is that the best state for you to be in? Can we find a way that triggers a reversal? You can't just sort of decide to reverse from one state to another, but you can facilitate that. Okay. Things like reframing, for example, and other techniques can help you actually then to move from one state to another, and then all of a sudden you experience that differently.
But you do have to think about what's the most appropriate state to be in. If you are in the playful state and you're in that state of high, that intense emotion, then, and you're about to take a penalty, then the danger is that you sort of you balloon it over the bar because you've got yourself a little bit excited about the whole situation. So but it offers you different alternatives, because traditional sports psychology theories around anxiety, for example, really emphasised that management of the worry or physiological arousal. But it didn't tend to emphasise changing the state altogether. So it just opens up different possibilities.
It's really interesting as you're talking there, Rob. I'm thinking of that I think it was Gary Neville or one of the England players who when they faced Brazil in the quarterfinal of a World Cup, as I say, I might be getting the player wrong, but they talked about the Brazilians sort of when they went into the tunnel and the Brazilians were walking out of their change room and they were singing and they were holding hands and they were very playful, and that kind of that's good. That there must be a cultural aspect to that. And obviously the England players were serious, and one wonders, do the England players have to manage anxiety and not so much be more serious, but be more effective within their serious role, or do they have to become more playful? And that might be individual specific. I remember going on tour years ago with QPR in their under 18 side, which it was then, and we went to Belgium, and it was a tournament with Feyenoord Ghana. And they allowed everybody, because they were so skillful, and they every single game they hand in hand sang when they were playing little musical instruments. I mean, it was just, and they played like that attitude. They were so playful.
And creativity resides in the playful state.
Yep.
And traditional Brazilian teams definitely have that, and they are known for creativity. That over recent years, it has changed a bit, have become a bit more known for their steel and their organisation and that sort of thing. But it's still part of the culture. Whether it's Neymar or Zico, going back a long way, but it's been part of that culture to kind of have very creative players, and so they value that, right? And so they, I would imagine that, right, through the youth systems like you were describing with Feyenoord Ghana, that they actually value that, and they let people play, and they give them freedom and all the sorts of things that enable creativity. And I just don't think, from everything I've seen, sort of standing on the outside, that our youth football encourages that. I mean, my own son plays, and I don't see that. And that's not a criticism of their setup. I think they've got a decent setup, and they've got it's good coaching, but it's a different emphasis. And so I think our players learn, are part of a particular culture, and their play this year was characterised by effort and organisation and energy, not a lot of creativity. In saying that, what's interesting is that the sports psychologist that actually was with England, I can't remember her name now.
You're going to test me here, and I'm on the tip of my tongue, and I will remember it.
She actually
Pippa Grange.
Yeah. So her PhD was in reversal theory.
Oh, really?
And she talks about the ebb and flow a lot, and I just remember in the summer seeing in the Guardian, I think it was, the picture of the defender Phil Maguire and Harry Maguire. Sorry, he was right in the middle of it on a unicorn in the swimming pool. The one where they're messing about and they're allowed to have a family there. They're allowed to do things. They're allowed to get out and about, and they're allowed to have families. That, as someone who is into reversal theory, I was so encouraged by that because I saw it's opening up different styles. It's opening up. So I think it's very that these guys have been learning. They've been socialized into an environment over the years. They can't just suddenly undo it. But I think a lot of the success this summer was about them actually not always on the pitch, but certainly off the pitch in particular, being able to be more playful more often. And I remember screaming at the TV when watching, years back when it was Capello and Wayne Rooney, and Rooney was talking about how he was bored.
Yep.
And I'm like, how can you let your players get bored? To not understand this, the psychology, to tie people up in the rooms and to make life so rigid and everything. It's just like, you're just depriving people of sort of fundamental human needs, and then you expect them to go out and be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I always say, when we get onto the subject of England, we could spend hours on this. And as I've said in previous podcasts, I was very impressed by the environment that was set up. I mean, whenever I've had conversations with ex-England players over the years, and I've had a lot of conversations, it's the two things that come through is, one, the anxiety, the fear of competing for England, and two, the environment and the serious nature of it. And that sort of is a neat segue onto, for all the coaches listening in at every level and every age group, would you say, Rob, that you mentioned experiencing different styles or helping them experience different states? That's got to be an important coaching quality to bring to the table, that it either doesn't have to be all serious all the time or all playful all the time. We're so good at being black and white about things. This is a culture of seriousness, or this is a culture of play. So help people experience different states and styles.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the work I do in my organisational sort of work, I rail against that term, a culture of. So that suggests it suggests it's one thing. Yeah. But if you actually go into different functions in an organisation, the marketing department want a culture of creativity, and in product development want a culture of innovation, and manufacturing want a culture of quality. So an organisation needs that variety, and a sports team, they need that variety, both because individuals have different preferences over time, but also you just need that sort of motivational richness, and to be able to experience different things, and to get different types of if you like, enjoyment, types of satisfaction out of the game. And ultimately, if you don't have a range of positive experiences, then actually, you're not going to ever get to the point of being an elite athlete, because you're just going to actually just get fed up with it. But if you do, and you haven't experienced that variety, then you've not got those different levers to pull on, in that elite environment, and you need them. Sometimes you need to fall back on relationships. Other times, you need to focus in on the moment and be able to do that. And kind of, other times you need to be able to sort of just dig in, and you're very conscious of what this moment means. At other times you need to be inventive. You need those different levers. You have to be able to train people to pull on those different levers, if you like, over time, by giving them very different experiences and creating that kind of diverse environment to work in.
It's interesting because as you're talking there, I'm kind of picturing a coach, and I suppose because I work a lot in football, I'm picturing a football coach sitting down with that bit of paper and thinking about their activities in head, and actually taking time to. I mean, I always talk about they should be putting in the psychosocial piece, and part of that psychosocial piece is with this activity. What state do I want my players to be in? What do I want to help them experience? Is there anything I can communicate to them that might help them be a bit more playful here? Whether that's be creative or have fun, find their own solutions. And then on this other activity here, I just want to bring a serious air into this, a serious state. With that in mind, because you've alluded to other states, and I don't know how relevant they are to sporting activities. I suppose they are, but what other states are there in the
So very, very briefly, there's the serious and playful, and then another pair is rebellious and conforming. So we talk about freedom or do we desire freedom, or do we want to follow rules? And so a lot of competition is serious conforming, because you've got a goal and there's a set of rules that you have to follow. And so the creativity often comes from the other side, which is, why mavericks can be so frustrating yet forming in certain situations. And then those are what we call somatic states. So they're influenced by your emotional experience is influenced by your level of sort of physiological arousal. And we've got the transactional states, which are about how you relate to other people, essentially. And so you've got what we call mastery and sympathy. Mastery is about power, control, competence. And sympathy is about care, empathy, affection, etc. And then the other pairing is for me or for others. Now, again, sport is very mastery-orientated, understandably. It's about winning, it's about learning, it's about mastering skills and things like that. There is a time and place for me as an individual, and there's a time and a place, for the other. To put the team first, to put colleagues first, to put your family first, etc. The other interesting one is sympathy, because we all need to care for ourselves, right? We all need to take care of each other. But I think in a performance situation, the sympathy state is often where that sort of catastrophe happens. That feeling of, okay, I'm in trouble now, or I'm getting anxious, this is stressing me out, and that sort of feeling of, oh my God, I wish I wasn't here, is that sort of, I start feeling sorry for myself. And I think that's when performance dies right down. So that performance moment, that sympathy state is kind of that's why mastery is so important, right? It's about getting control of the situation. But in the general sense, that psychosocial sense, that sympathy state is really important. I need to take care of myself, of my own needs. I need to be there as a source of emotional support for my teammates, etc., etc. It's still very important.
As you're saying, mastery and sympathy, or mastery versus sympathy, it sort of strikes me as leadership, doesn't it? It's leading yourself and leading others, and having the capacity to do that, and coaches providing opportunities within activities or within an environment and a culture to help their players experience that. And on the note of sympathy, I'm going to be sympathetic to you, and I know you've got to get on with the rest of your day, but I tell you what, I think that the reversal theory is, I think you've scaffolded that down lovely for the audience, and I envision another podcast if you'd be willing to come back on the Sport Psych show and drill down further, because I think we drilled down nicely on the serious versus playful state, but there's definitely more to have a conversation about the rebellious versus conforming, the mastery versus sympathy, and what was the other one, Rob?
So we talked about serious, playful, conforming, rebellious, mastery, sympathy, and it's just then self or other.
Self and
so
other,
when you talk about mastery and sympathy, it's always, is that mastery for me, or is it mastery for someone else? So that's coaching, essentially, coaching collaboration, or is it sympathy for me, sympathy for others? They do combine, but that's another layer of the theory of the onion.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know actually that will tap people's interest. So, how can people follow you, and how can they get hold of you if they'd like to do some work with you?
I'm on Twitter at Robert S. Robson. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm Rob Robson on LinkedIn, and my website is 8connect.co.uk.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Rob, thank you so much for joining me today on the Sports Psych Show. Everyone, that was Rob Robson. Wasn't that fascinating? I really, I enjoyed all the conversation, but I really loved the conversation around Rob's experience of master swimming, using the sports psychology techniques that he uses every day in workplace and with clients. There's such a difference between knowing and doing. I know that myself from competing in golf, and sometimes you know this stuff and you don't always do it, and that can be the challenge. If you enjoyed that podcast, please do leave a review, and don't forget, you can always subscribe to get updates for further podcasts. I've got plenty more fascinating guests like Rob coming up, so you tune in next week. Bye for now.